Be a good girl, sign the house over, and maybe I'll be nice enough to let you keep your clothes. That's what my husband whispered to me in front of the entire courthouse, while his mistress, wearing the jewelry I paid for, giggled against his shoulder. He thought I was broken. He thought I was nothing. But in exactly 10 minutes, I was going to turn his happily ever after into a federal investigation. My name is Sarah, and if you think you've been betrayed, wait until you hear what my husband did while I was at my mother's bedside saying my final goodbyes. I stood there in that cold, sterile hallway, feeling the eyes of every lawyer and clerk on us. Mark looked impeccable in his designer suit. He looked like the success story of the year. And Tiffany? She was clinging to his arm like a parasite, wearing a smirk so sharp it could draw blood. "Did you hear him, Sarah?" Tiffany chirped, her voice like nails on a chalkboard. "We've already picked out the new wallpaper for your master bedroom. It's a shame, really. You worked so hard on that house. Just for me to take it." Mark leaned in closer, his breath smelling of the expensive scotch he'd been buying with our joint account. "Don't make a scene, Sarah. You're a failed artist. You're a nobody without my name. Sign the papers, walk away with your dignity, or I will personally make sure you end up in a homeless shelter by the end of the week. Do we have an agreement?" He actually patted my cheek, like I was a disobedient pet. I looked at him, really looked at him. This was the man I'd spent 10 years supporting. I was the one who designed his brand. I was the one who worked 2 jobs to pay his tuition when he was finding himself. And the moment he found success, he found Tiffany. "The house, Mark?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I needed them to think I was on the verge of tears. I needed them to feel invincible. "Everything, Sarah," Mark snapped. "The house, the cars, the business. You're lucky I'm not suing you for the air you breathe." They turned their backs on me and strutted into the courtroom, laughing. They thought they had won because I had been quiet for the last month. They thought my silence was the sound of a woman giving up. They were dead wrong. My silence was the sound of me working 18 hours a day with a forensic accountant and a private investigator. As I walked into that courtroom, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a predator. We took our seats. The judge, a stern woman named Miller who had a reputation for hating liars, looked over her spectacles at the piles of paperwork. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Miller began, "you are claiming that your wife has no right to the equity in Sterling Media, and you are requesting an immediate eviction order for the primary residence. Is that correct?" Mark stood up, his charity gala persona in full swing. "Yes, Your Honor. It's a tragic situation, truly. But Sarah has contributed nothing but debt to this marriage. I've supported her for years, and now that we're parting ways, I simply want to protect the assets I built with my own sweat and blood." I felt my lawyer, David, shift next to me. He leaned over and whispered, "Ready to pull the trigger?" "Do it," I said. David stood up slowly. "Your Honor, we have a significant problem with Mr. Sterling's filing. It appears he has misplaced about $4 million in assets, and we have the digital trail to show exactly where they went." The smirk on Mark's face didn't just disappear. It froze. "What are you talking about?" Mark stammered. "That's a lie. I've been completely transparent." "Really, Mark?" David pulled out a stack of bright yellow folders. "Then perhaps you can explain why T Media Holdings, a shell company registered in your mistress's name, has been receiving weekly wire transfers from your company's tax escrow account. Transfers that started the very week my client's mother was hospitalized?" The air left the room. Tiffany's eyes went wide, and she suddenly pulled her hand away from Mark's arm as if he were on fire. But that wasn't the bomb. That was just the fuse. "Your Honor," David continued, his voice echoing through the silent room, "we aren't just talking about divorce anymore. We are talking about systematic embezzlement and tax fraud. And we have the audio recordings to prove that Mr. Sterling didn't just plan to leave his wife. He planned to frame her for the missing money." Mark's face went from pale to ghostly white. He turned to look at me, and for the first time in months, he saw me. truly saw me. He saw that the good girl was gone. Sarah, he hissed, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and terror. What did you do? I didn't answer. I just looked at the judge. Wait until you hear what was on those recordings. Because it wasn't just Mark's voice on the tape. And the second person involved was the last person I ever expected to betray me. Mark's voice was a jagged whisper that cut through the silence of the courtroom. Sarah, what did you do? I didn't blink. I didn't even look at him. I kept my eyes fixed on Judge Miller, who was now flipping through the yellow folders with a look of growing disgust. You see, Mark thought he was playing a game of checkers, while I had been playing grandmaster-level chess. But to understand how we got to this courtroom, you have to understand the night my world actually ended. It wasn't the day I found a lipstick stain or a suspicious receipt. No, it was much, much worse. 3 months ago, I was sitting in a hospital room, holding my mother's frail hand. She was drifting in and out of consciousness. I was exhausted, broken, and desperate for a word of comfort from my husband. I called Mark 10 times. Oh, he didn't answer. I decided to check our home security cameras from my phone, just to see if he was asleep or if something was wrong. What I saw on that screen didn't just break my heart. It turned my blood into ice. There was Mark in our kitchen, pouring champagne for Tiffany. But they weren't just celebrating an affair. Mark was holding a stack of legal documents. My father's inheritance papers. She's too distracted by the old woman to notice a few signatures, Mark said on the crystal clear audio, laughing as he toasted Tiffany. By the time her mom passes, Sarah won't just be an orphan. She'll be a bankrupt orphan. I've already moved the first $2 million to the T-Media account. She thinks she's signing medical release forms, but she's signing over her power of attorney. Tiffany leaned in, kissing him. And the house? When do I get the keys? The house is the final move, Mark replied. I'll frame the business losses on her creative negligence. She'll be so buried in debt she'll beg me to take the house just to clear her name. I sat in that hospital room, tears streaming down my face, listening to the man I loved plot my total destruction while my mother took her last breaths. That was the moment the Sarah they knew died. In her place, a cold, calculating stranger was born. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't even call him. I waited. I spent the next 12 weeks acting the part of the grieving, distracted wife. Every time Mark gave me a document to sign, I took a high-resolution photo of it before signing it with a special disappearing ink pen I'd ordered online. Then I'd reprint the document and sign it for real, but only after making my own adjustments to the fine print. But as I looked at the yellow folders in the courtroom, I realized Mark wasn't the only one who had betrayed me. Your Honor, my lawyer David said, pulling a second USB drive from his briefcase. While investigating the wire transfers to T-Media Holdings, we discovered that Mr. Sterling didn't act alone. He had help from someone within my client's own inner circle, someone who had access to her private passwords. I felt a cold shiver go down my spine. This was the part that still hurt. We would like to play Exhibit B, David announced. The audio began to play through the courtroom speakers. Is the money in the account yet? A female voice asked. It wasn't Tiffany. My breath hitched. It was a voice I had known since kindergarten. It was Chloe, my sister, my only sibling, the person I had trusted more than anyone else in the world. Almost. Mark's voice answered on the recording. Once Sarah is officially unstable after the funeral, we'll move the rest. You'll get your 20%, Chloe. Just keep feeding me her therapy notes. I need the judge to think she's mentally unfit to handle the estate. The courtroom gasped. I looked back at the gallery. Chloe was sitting in the third row, her face turning a deep, shameful purple. She tried to stand up, but her legs gave out, and she sank back into her seat, covering her face with her hands. Mark was trembling now. His success story suit suddenly looked 3 sizes too big for him. He looked like a cornered rat. That recording is illegal, Mark screamed, slamming his fist on the table. She bugged our house. That's a violation of privacy. Judge Miller slammed her gavel so hard the sound echoed like a gunshot. Mr. Sterling, one more outburst and I will have you removed in handcuffs. In this state, evidence of a felony in progress is absolutely admissible. And from what I'm hearing, we aren't just talking about a messy divorce. We are talking about a criminal conspiracy. Tiffany, seeing the ship sinking, suddenly turned on Mark. I didn't know about the sister. Mark, you told me it was just business. You told me she was okay with this. Shut up, Tiffany, Mark hissed. But I wasn't done. Not even close. Wait, I said, speaking up for the first time. I stood up and looked Mark right in the eye. Mark, you told me in the hallway that I was nothing without your name, that I was a failed artist. I looked at the judge. Your Honor, Mr. Sterling also forgot to mention that Sterling Media's biggest contract, the one that keeps the company alive, was signed last night. But it wasn't signed with Sterling Media. It was signed with my new independent firm. And since I own 100% of the intellectual property he's been using, he currently owes me for 3 years of backdated licensing fees. Mark's jaw literally dropped. What? No, that's impossible. I own the IP. Check the fine print on those medical forms you had me sign, babe, I whispered, mimicking his tone from the hallway. You should have read what you were signing before you tried to rob me. The judge looked at Mark, then at the sheriff's deputy standing at the door. Mr. Sterling, the judge said coldly, I am freezing all your assets effective immediately, and I am referring this case to the district attorney's office for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Mark looked like he was about to have a heart attack, but the look on Tiffany's face was even better. She realized she had hitched her wagon to a man who was about to go to prison. But if Mark thought a prison sentence was the end of his problems, he was wrong. Because the mysterious ally who helped me get those recordings, he was waiting outside with a whole different kind of surprise for Mark. The courtroom was in chaos. Tiffany was screaming at Mark. Chloe was sobbing in the back row, and Mark was staring at me as if I had just grown a second head. But while the lawyers scrambled and the judge barked orders, I felt a strange, cold calm, because the real nuclear option wasn't even in this room yet. You think you're so smart, Sarah? Mark spat, his voice cracking. So what? You found some accounts. You trapped me with some paperwork. But you forget one thing. I'm the face of the industry. Without me, your intellectual property is just a bunch of sketches. Nobody will work with you once I tell them you're a paranoid, vengeful shrew. I didn't answer him. Instead, I looked at the clock on the courtroom wall. 11:15 a.m. Right on time, I whispered. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. A man in a sharp, charcoal gray suit walked in. He didn't look like a lawyer. He looked like a storm cloud. Mark's face went from white to a sickly shade of gray. Julian, what are you doing here? Julian was Mark's biggest rival. The man Mark had spent the last 5 years trying to destroy. But Julian wasn't here to gloat. He walked straight to my table and handed David a final sealed envelope. Your Honor, David said, his voice booming with newfound power. Mr. Julian Vance is here as a material witness. He is the mysterious investor who has been secretly funding the forensic audit of Sterling Media for the past 3 months. Mark lunged toward Julian, but the bailiff caught him by the shoulder. You traitor, Mark yelled at Julian. You've been colluding with my wife? Julian didn't even blink. Colluding? No, Mark. I was just protecting my interests. You see, Sarah didn't just come to me with your fraud. She came to me with proof that you've been selling my proprietary algorithms on the black market to fund Tiffany's lifestyle. The courtroom went dead silent. This wasn't just a divorce anymore. This was corporate espionage. Tiffany's head snapped toward Mark. What? You said that money was from your bonuses? You told me we were safe. Shut up, Tiffany, Mark hissed, but it was too late. The judge snatched the envelope from David. As she read the contents, her eyebrows climbed higher and higher. Mr. Sterling, it appears there is a warrant being processed for your arrest in 3 different states. It seems your T-Media shell company hasn't just been stealing from your wife. You've been laundering money for some very dangerous people. I looked at Tiffany. She was shaking. Her eyes were darting toward the exit. She was a gold digger, sure, but she wasn't a martyr. She wasn't about to go down with the ship. I have the emails. Tiffany suddenly shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at Mark. He made me sign those papers. He told me if I didn't help him hide the money from Sarah, he'd dump me with nothing. I have a folder on my cloud drive, everything, all the transfers, all the names. Just don't arrest me. Tiffany, no, Mark roared. But the loyal mistress was already pulling out her phone, desperate to trade Mark's head for her own freedom. It was poetic. The woman he chose over me was the one currently handing the handcuffs to the police. I leaned over the table, looking Mark directly in his panicked, sweating face. Remember what you said in the hallway, Mark? That I'm nothing without you? I paused, letting the silence hang. It turns out you were the one built on my foundation. And now that I've pulled the rug out, there's nothing left but the dirt you crawled out of. The judge looked at the bailiffs. Detain Mr. Sterling. Do not let him leave this building. As the handcuffs clicked shut around Mark's wrists, the sound was the most beautiful music I'd ever heard. But as he was being led away, he leaned back and snarled at me one last time. You think you won, Sarah? You think you get the house and the money? Check your email. Check it right now. If I'm going down, I'm taking your father's legacy with me. I pressed send before we walked in here. My heart skipped a beat. My father's legacy wasn't just money. It was a digital archive of his life's work, designs that were worth more than the house and the business combined. I pulled out my phone, my hands finally starting to shake. Mark was smiling again, a dark, twisted smile. What did he send? And who did he send it to? The click of the handcuffs was supposed to be the end, but Mark's twisted smile told me the nightmare was just beginning. Check your email, Sarah, he had hissed. If I can't have your father's legacy, nobody can. I pulled out my phone, my breath catching in my throat. My father had spent 40 years building a library of architectural designs, the Aurora Project. It was his life's work, worth tens of millions, and he had left it all to me. It was more than just money. It was his soul. I opened my inbox. There it was. An outgoing message sent from Mark's account to a notorious leaks forum and 3 of our biggest international competitors. The subject line, The Aurora Project, full source code and designs, public domain. My heart didn't just drop, it shattered. If those files were downloaded, my father's work would be worthless. It would be stolen, copied, and gutted by corporations before the sun went down. I told you, Mark laughed as the officers pulled him toward the side door. I'm the one with the passwords, Sarah. You might get the house, but I just burned your father's ghost to the ground. Tiffany was crying in the corner, realizing that her immunity deal wouldn't matter if there was no money left to sue for. Chloe, my sister, was still staring at the floor, a ghost of a person. The judge was calling for order, but the room felt like it was spinning. I looked at the email. Sent at 11:02 a.m. It was now 11:25. The files were massive. They had to still be uploading. I looked at Julian. Can you stop it? Julian grabbed his laptop, his fingers flying across the keys. I can try to intercept the server, but Mark used a dead man's switch. Once it starts, it's almost impossible to kill. I felt a wave of nausea. Had I been too cocky? Had my grandmaster moves led me to lose the only thing that actually mattered? But then I remembered something. Something Mark always mocked me for. Every Sunday for 10 years, I was the one who did the digital maintenance for our home server. Mark didn't even know how to change a Wi-Fi password. He was the face, remember? He thought he was a genius because he used a hidden vault on our shared drive. I sat down at the table, my hands steadying. I didn't open the email. I opened my home security app, the one I used to watch him and Tiffany in the kitchen. Mark, I called out. He stopped at the door, looking back with a triumphant sneer. What? Want to beg for the password? Too late, Sarah, it's gone. No, I said, my voice eerily calm. I just wanted to remind you of something you said last year. You said I was obsessive for keeping a backup of the house server on a separate, offline encrypted drive. Mark's sneer faltered. And do you remember how you complained that the internet in the house was sluggish this morning? I continued. That's because I throttled the upload speed to zero point 0.1 kilobytes per second the moment I saw you log into that vault from your phone in the hallway. The silence that followed was absolute. Julian looked up from his laptop, a grin spreading across his face. She's right. The upload is stuck at 2%. It hasn't moved in 20 minutes. It's a ghost signal, Mark. You didn't leak anything. You just sent a bunch of corrupted data to a dead link. Mark let out a roar of pure animalistic rage. He tried to lunge at me, but the two officers slammed him against the wall. You witch, he screamed. I'll destroy you. I'll spend every penny I have left to destroy you. You don't have any pennies left, Mark, I said, standing up and walking toward him. I leaned in, just like he had done to me in the hallway. The judge just froze your accounts, and the dangerous people you were laundering money for, they don't like it when their partners get arrested. I imagine they'll be looking for someone to blame for their lost millions. Mark's rage evaporated instantly, replaced by a paralyzing, cold fear. Oh, he knew I was right. In the world he'd been playing in, being a snitch or a failure was a death sentence. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, I believe we are done here. Not quite, Judge Miller said, looking at Tiffany and Chloe. There is still the matter of the conspiracy charges. As Mark was dragged out, his screams echoing in the marble hall, I looked at my sister. Chloe finally looked up, her eyes red and pleading. Sarah, please. I was in debt. He promised he'd help me. I'm your sister. I looked at her, the woman who had sold my mental health records to the man trying to ruin me. I don't have a sister, I said. I just have a witness. I walked out of that courtroom and into the bright afternoon sun. The air felt different, cleaner. But there was one final piece of the puzzle. You see, I didn't just throttle the internet. I had sent a different email while Mark was busy leaking my files. And that email was addressed to the one person Mark feared more than the IRS. The person Mark feared more than the IRS wasn't a lawyer or a federal agent. It was Vittorio Rossi. Vittorio was the godfather of international architecture and Mark's biggest idol. Mark had spent 5 years begging for a single meeting with him, trying to position Sterling Media as Rossi's gateway into the American market. Mark's entire future, his plan B if the divorce got messy, rested on a secret deal he thought he was closing with the Italians. But while Mark was busy smirking at me in the hallway, I was hitting send on a very specific digital package addressed to Rossi's private villa in Lake Como. It wasn't just a business proposal. It was a forensic map of Mark's soul. I sent Rossi the original time-stamped blueprints of the Aurora project from my father's 1998 archives, proving Mark was trying to sell stolen property. I also included the audio of Mark calling Rossi a pompous old fossil, who was easy to manipulate once the deal was signed. As I stood in the sun outside the court, my phone buzzed. It was a video call from an Italian country code. Sarah? The voice was deep, gravelly, and commanded absolute respect. It was Vittorio. I have seen the files, and I have heard the tapes. This man, he is a cockroach. He thought you wouldn't notice the inconsistencies, Mr. Rossi, I said calmly. I do not like being used, Sarah. But more than that, I do not like seeing a master's legacy, your father's legacy, in the hands of a thief. Vittorio paused. I have just contacted my legal team. By tomorrow, every contract Mark Sterling has in Europe will be blacklisted. He is finished. But you, I see your father's eyes in your sketches. My jet will be in New York on Monday. Come to Milan. We have a real empire to build. I hung up, a cold, satisfied smile spreading across my face. Behind me, the courthouse doors burst open. Two federal agents were leading Mark out in handcuffs. He wasn't screaming anymore. He looked hollow. He had just received word that his European investors had pulled out, triggering a series of margin calls that would strip him of every cent he had hidden in offshore accounts. He saw me standing by my car. For a second, the old Mark tried to resurface. "You think you won?" he croaked. "I'll be out in 5 years, Sarah. I'll come for you." 5 years? I stepped closer, my voice a deadly whisper. "Mark, you didn't just steal from me. You laundered money for people who don't believe in 5-year sentences. They think you're a snitch now. I'd worry less about me and more about who you're sharing a cell with." The blood drained from his face. He finally understood. I hadn't just divorced him. I had erased him. Tiffany was let out next, sobbing as she was placed in a separate police cruiser. She had tried to trade Mark's secrets for her freedom, but she was too late. I had already given the DA everything they needed. She was going down for tax evasion and conspiracy. And then there was Chloe, my sister. She stood at the top of the marble stairs looking like a ghost. "Sarah, please, I'm your only family. You can't let them take me." I looked at the woman who had sold my private therapy notes for a 20% commission. "Family is built on trust, Chloe. You're just a stranger with my last name." I got into my car. "I've already paid for your lawyer. Consider that my final gift. Don't call me again." I drove away, watching the courthouse disappear in my rearview mirror. 3 months later, I was standing on a balcony overlooking the Duomo in Milan. I was 30 years old, the CEO of my own firm, and the lead architect for Rossi's new global initiative. My father's name wasn't just a memory anymore, it was a brand. Mark was sitting in a maximum security cell, reportedly terrified of his own shadow. Tiffany was working in a prison laundry room. And the house? I sold it. I didn't want to live in a place filled with old lies. I bought a penthouse in Manhattan with the money Mark thought he had stolen from me. I took a sip of my wine and looked at the sunset. Mark was right about one thing in that hallway. I was a good girl. I was good at planning, good at waiting, and even better at winning.